Okay, we have a guest speaker today who's coming in through Skype. And Pat Davidson Reef has written a book on Dahlov Ipcar, and she had known Dahlov for many, many years. And Pat, could you explain how you got to know Dahlov?
Yes, I think I did. Here is my children's book, so you can see it clearly. And I got to know Dahlov and write about her through an educational course at the University of Maine at Gorham, where I was teaching in 1971. I was teaching children's literature and what's new in children's literature. I would use the big, massive textbook we had, but I brought in other books on the side. And one of them, many of them actually, were by Dahlov Ipcar because she was a new Maine artist at the time. And I wanted to show my class some exciting illustrations. And they loved her work. I had 19 students who were student teachers, and they loved her work, but they asked a lot of questions that I could not answer, like, how long does it take to do an illustration? Does she do her illustrations first or write her stories first? Why use end papers, and what is the importance of end papers? And so I said, you know what? Take out a piece of paper, sign your name to it, and write one question. I will send all of these to Dahlov. I'll get her address from the librarian, and with her permission, I'll read to you her letter if it comes back. It came back with all my materials that I sent in 5 days. She had not only written me a beautiful little note, she wrote individually answers on each student paper. I Xeroxed them off and gave them the originals and kept the copies for myself, putting them in a filing cabinet because I thought in my youth, one day I will write a book about her, and this is primary source material. And part of this book, in the end, where it says, what is the creative process and how important is the creative process, I use the student questions and put in Dahlov's answers. It's at the end of the book. So this book is not only for children who are 8 or 9 years old in the second or third grade, fourth grade. It is also for teachers and parents and art lovers who want a quick overview visually of her work, her different contributions in different mediums, and a nice introduction to Dahlov Ipcar. And so this is how the book came out, through teaching at the University of Maine in Augusta and my desire to write about her.
Okay. And did you connect with her at other different times?
Yes, thank you for that very good question. I did. In her note, she said, after your semester, why don't you come out on a summer day and visit me at my studio? And so I had the pleasure of visiting her in Robin Hood Farm on Georgetown Island, 6 miles out of Bath, Maine. And I just loved the place, and I loved her, and we talked a great deal. And I started doing reviews for the Lewiston Sun Journal and teaching, and I would review her work in different galleries, and one thing led to another, and of course the book did materialize. It materialized in 1987. And for many years, it was kind of a quiet children's book on the horizons. And then last year, at 78, I decided I want to do more with this book. I want to improve it. So we did an update, and it is lovely. And in improving it, in the back, I was lucky enough to get Dahlov to do an afterword. So in the back, there is 2 pages of Dahlov's personal views on her life in Maine and why it was important to her and her family.
Okay.
I also got new photographs from her son, Charlie, who lives in Maine, and I got a wonderful photograph from her son, Bob, of her looking out from the canvas and having a paintbrush in her hand, and that's the way I remembered her. She looked just like that when she passed away in February 10th in 2018, and also she was 99 years old then.
That's wonderful.
Answer the questions. I can talk forever, so just feel free to interrupt me and ask questions.
The cover photo of the book is incredible. Is that one that you chose of her paintings?
Yes, I did. I loved it, and the irony was I had used it in the earlier book in black and white. I had used it as a filler because I needed an extra illustration. And originally, I wanted one of the murals to be the cover, and I had requested that. See this yellow mural? It's called Golden Savannah.
Yes.
And can you see it?
Yes. Is that the one in Bath?
Oh, no. That one was in Lewiston, Maine, and it was at the Sun Federal Savings Bank. And they didn't like, the new company bought the building and they didn't like the work. So they donated the work to the Shriners Hospital for Children in Springfield, Massachusetts. And It's a breathtaking work, and I loved it. And I wanted it for the front of the cover and the back of the cover, so when you opened it up, it became one work. But it is a mural, and it should be seen as a mural. And when I saw the proof, I didn't like it because we had to cut it in half, and it didn't look right. So I said, we can't use that. So I called Charlie, her son, and I told him the dilemma. And I said, what about Festival of the Stars? Do you have that in color? And he said, sure. And he sent it to me. And I saw it in color. I said, that's the cover. That is a beautiful cover. I love it. Thank you. And he allowed me to use it. And it's called Festival of the Stars. I like it because it shows her sophisticated, mature work. It shows her geometric shapes, her superimposed images, all the activity, and a wide cultural diversity in it. So I just loved it. And then we had an interesting experience. The publisher said, well, what do you want us to use for the background? Let's go black. I said, no. I don't think so. It's for children and adults, but I think we have to do something cheerful. So she said, let's go white. I said, it doesn't look right. Let's try blue. Let's bring out the blues in the painting. Blue was perfect. It brought out the blues in the painting, and we went with that. So that's how we got the cover.
Yeah. Where is that painting? Do you know?
I don't know where that painting is now. I do think that the family owns it.
Oh, good.
The family owns it. There are other paintings in the work, and they're at this one here. This beautiful zebra painting is at the Colby Museum of Art. And then also, let's see, she did many murals, and in Georgetown Central School. This is her mural, and she titled it Calico Jungle, like the book she wrote, Calico Jungle.
Excuse me, Pat, could you move that over a little bit? To your left?
To my left.
Yeah, that there, we can see the mural.
Perfect.
Yes.
Gorgeous.
I've seen it in the school, and it is beautiful.
And
It is
that's
really beautiful.
how she did murals, God only knows. It's so hard to look up and paint on a wall, even on a huge ladder. I'm not to allow the paint to dribble down and or run into other images. It's amazing. She had many talents, and that's why I was so impressed with her. She worked in different mediums. She could do children's illustrations. She could do murals. She could do tapestry with hooked rugs and fine needlepoint tapestry, and I can show you that. And she also, here is a needlepoint tapestry that she did.
A little bit to your left. There we go. That's perfect.
Is that good? And I love that. That's one of a kind. And she also did wonderful soft sculptures. She had a wonderful mind and a creative view of life.
Yes. And she was born in New York City, is that correct?
No, she was born in Vermont in 1917. She did live in New York. Her mother and dad were William Zorach, the sculptor, and Marguerite Thompson Zorach, the artist and tapestry creator, who had a wonderful exhibit at the Farnsworth last summer of her tapestries. They lived in New York City, in Brooklyn, New York, and they also lived in Greenwich Village. And that's where they lived from September to like June. Then they came as a family to Maine from like June to September when school would start, and they went back to New York because New York is the heart of the art community. And but they loved their Maine place and they used it as a summer residence. But then when Dahlov got married and had a baby, her husband Adolf, who was a school teacher himself, and Dahlov decided they would take care and be caretakers, really, of the family home on Georgetown Island for one winter and see how it went. They loved it, and they never moved back to New York. They made it their home. And they had a real farm with cows and eggs and they had produce there and everything. They worked it as a farm for years and years and years. It's a small white house with just beautiful blue shutters on top of a hill overlooking an apple orchard. I don't bore you to tears, but also she loved cats. And here is the cat. Can you see this cat?
Yes, that's perfect.
She called me one day and she said, I'm 96 years old and I have sad things to tell you. I said, what? And she said, oh, my cat went to heaven. I never get another cat at my age. It would be ridiculous. But if you ever ran into a calico cat, yeah, I might change my mind. So when I got off the phone, I went lickety-split into the computer and I found a calico cat at the Westbrook Animal Refuge League and arranged for Charlie, her son, to come pick it up. And it became hers the last 3 years of her life, and she loved it. And Bob, her other son, took a photograph of it for me one Christmas and sent it to me. And I put it in my book because it just seemed to belong there. And the name of the cat is Chelsea Girl.
Oh, and is that one of her tapestries there, of the pillow?
It's one of her illustrations. from the Cat at Night children's book, and
Okay.
that was made into a fabric pillow in New York City by a well-known rug company that reproduces fine art into fabric, and it looks beautiful in fabric.
Yes,
And
it does.
I loved it, and I guess her son took the photo with the cat above it because the cat's colors were the colors of her artwork. And
That's
on
great.
February 6th last year, for a gift as a birthday, my birthday is on February 6th, and Dahlov sent me that pillow. It's a pillow with a fabric design from her book illustration and from that cat photograph. And that was February 6th, and she passed away February 10th. So that was
Wow.
very sad.
That is so wonderful that you have that pillow.
But it's a happy memory. And
Yes.
now Charlie has her cat, Chelsea Girl, and he loves the cat with his wife, and he's very happy with it. Here is another illustration that I love, and it comes from the Calico Jungle. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes.
And she wrote a book called Calico Jungle, and it's for young people in the second grade, third grade possibly, and it's just beautiful. And it's about a little boy who falls asleep underneath a quilt which his mother has created for him, and all the quilt animals and wildlife come alive, and this is one of the animals she created for him, and it is beautiful, and Dahlov had a magnificent imagination.
Yes.
Anyway, so I used that as one of the chapters. In another chapter, I talked about the wonders of creativity and its process, and I talked about the fact that I did teach at the university years ago children's literature, and students did ask questions, and Dahlov answered them, and I saved them and put them in the book. And in the back of the book, she asked questions, and one good question was from a student at the university was, what determines a good quality in content of a child's book? And her answer was originality, imagination, opening children's eyes to new experiences, poetic images, and writing that will stir the soul. These equal good qualities. Trite, commonplace, dull, didactic, saccharine, sentimental are of a poor book. So I think she was very genuine and very spontaneous in answering some of these questions. Well, another good question from one of my students was, what difference does it make if the end papers are colorful, as in Calico Jungle, or not? And she said, good design teaches appreciation of good art just by being satisfying. End papers are a chance for a more stylized design than the inner illustrations. Man is a design-making animal. He wants everything orderly. And I thought that was very good, too. All of her children's books have beautiful end papers, and paperbacks don't have end papers, and many companies no longer put end papers in a book because they're extra money, and publishers can't afford the extra color on end papers anymore. But all of Dahlov Ipcar's books have end papers, and they were reissued and published by the Islandport Press of Yarmouth, Maine, and they do a wonderful job on children's books and regular books also. Also, in addition, I wanted to mention that a good children's book appeals to children and adults alike. For example, Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, A Wrinkle in Time by C.S. Lewis, and Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. And I thought that many of your students might like to know that there are a few new children's books out that for me are very exciting. One is by Melissa Sweet for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. The Story of E.B. White is a good book to look for. And another is Freedom Over Me for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders by Ashley Bryan. And Ashley Bryan is an African-American artist who lives on Islesboro and is in his 90s. He'll be having an exhibit at the Portland Museum of Art this August. And speaking of Dahlov Ipcar, she will be having a major exhibit at Bates College this June on both floors of the Olin Arts Center. And that might be something your students might like to plan to go and see.
Oh, that's fabulous, because that's probably free for everybody since it's at the university. Yeah.
It's free of charge, and it'll be wonderful for you all to see it. She also shows at a gallery in Cape Elizabeth, which is free of charge, and will be coming down June 15th. But she has been, on view, has been 100 of Dahlov Ipcar's personal collection. And that is outstanding. And it's in an art gallery called Rachel Wall's Fine Art. And it's in Fort Williams. You have to go into the park all the way up to the very top. And there's a left where you go down to a museum that is a lighthouse, and a right where you go up to 2 brick buildings, which used to be officers' headquarters. And one of them now is an art gallery called Rachel Wall's Fine Art. And she has 100 of Dahlov Ipcar's works in that gallery at this time. And it's free of charge. Free of charge.
That's exciting.
Actually, it's free of charge. It's not always open. And I have the telephone number. I recommend, if you're coming down from Augusta or anywhere else in Maine to look for it, you call the telephone number and see if she's in. The number is 266-5411.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. 266-5411. It's worth a trip. It's would be a daytime trip, but it's worth a trip to Cape Elizabeth and to see Dahlov's work.
And it's called Rachel Wall's
Fine Arts.
Fine Arts. Okay.
Yes.
And it goes until June 15th? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think on the back of this book is Dahlov Ipcar's philosophy. A child raised without art is as surely deprived as a child raised without love. And I think that's the way she felt about her art and about creativity. She also felt that putting her art in children's books was a way to have everyone be able to take home a work of art by Dahlov and enjoy it, because they could always get her books out of the library, a local library. Usually across the state, you will see Dahlov Ipcar works in all elementary school libraries and public libraries. So she loved libraries, and she felt that putting fine art into children's book was the best way of getting art in everybody's home for those that really were not, quote, collectors of art. I was very impressed with that. It came from her childhood. She said when she was 8, 9, and 10 years old, she would take the trolley, the subway, in from Greenwich Village in New York to go to the New York Public Library. And she spent hours and hours looking at National Geographic magazines and wild animals and books on wild animals. And that's where she got her ideas for her work. In addition to that, she did say that I asked her, did you ever travel in Africa? Did you ever travel and see these animals? So she said no, she was very happy to stay in Maine, and she was a mental traveler, that she traveled as a mental traveler, and I got a kick out of that. And also in my book, I show when she was really a child at 4 and doing crayon drawings like that. And I showed where she did this wonderful frieze on wrapping paper and with just paint, poster paint, and it is now up in her bedroom, her childhood bedroom, as a frieze. So I thought these were good examples to show young people that creativity is important, and their creativity is important, and they could grow up like and be an artist like Dahlov. And always dream. Never forget a dream. I didn't forget a dream when I was teaching children's literature to student teachers. I dreamed of writing a book about Dahlov Ipcar, and finally it came through. It was worth the dream.
How long did you spend with her when you were writing the book to interview her?
Well, I spent many different hours with her, and I had many different meetings with her and interviews with her, and I have her on tape and everything. And I would call her on the phone and ask her different questions and read to her different passages. And also I would ask different questions as the writing emerged. And I had fun picking out what I wanted to be as part of this children's book, because I wanted special things. I wanted her beginnings, which were simple, but I also wanted something like Blue Savannah, which is a beautiful, beautiful work on the 4th floor of the Portland Museum of Art. And it's one of her best works. So I had fun selecting the art that I wanted to show in the book. And when it was, my happiest day was August 26, 2016, when I went out there and she asked me to come out to celebrate the book's publication. And Charlie brought in some pizza, and I brought in a bowl of fruit. And she, at 98, had made a peach upside-down cake with whipped cream on it, and it was heavenly. And then we sat on the couch together, and I read to her the whole thing and showed her all of the photos, and she loved them. She loved them. Yeah, I gave her a dozen books. And she used them for Christmas gifts and things. She loved it, and she said, most of all, I love it because I know you're going to try and get this into the public schools of the state of Maine. And that's where I'd like to be remembered, with school children, in libraries, in the elementary schools across the state. And it all came about. And it was a dream, and it was worth the dream. And if you don't dream, you can't go anywhere. You have to keep your feet on the ground and be always realistic, but you have to follow your bliss, your dream. And follow your bliss is a statement that I'm borrowing from Joseph Campbell, who is a famous author and scholar of mythology, who passed away years ago. But he always said you have to follow your bliss, and that will make you happy. And I did. So I am happy.
Okay. All right. Well, I have some more questions from students.
Yes.
Okay. This is from a student. I would like to know what inspired her style of artwork and who were her greatest influences.
Say that again. I didn't hear it clearly.
The microphone's up there.
Oh, okay. I would like to know what inspired her style of artwork and who were her greatest influences.
I don't absolutely know, but I can tell you in many years of knowing her and talking with her, that she was a very strong personality in her own right. She went to Oberlin College for 6 months and it didn't work there. She came home. She did not like to be studying what others were doing and doing what the teachers, art teachers, were telling her she must do to develop her discipline. And I think her greatest influence probably was her mother and father, who had a liberal and free attitude towards life and didn't teach her specifics, but allowed her to grow on her own. And she grew on her own. She didn't follow another artist. She did her own thing. And if you see in her early work, for example, if you see in her early work, like this particular frieze, if you look carefully at this particular frieze, you will see the same examples of animals and wildlife in this sophisticated design that she made as a mature adult. So she had her own view of things, plus the fact it was more than just reproducing reality in prancing figures and intricate designs, which is part of her work. It was also three-dimensional. Underneath the painting, before she put her focus on animals, she would do a geometric abstract grid in different colors. And then she would put the animals and the activity. So she designed her own style. She followed her own bliss, good or bad. This was for her, and she was not going to follow art teachers. I think a lot of her work, however, looks like fabric design. And she loved fabric design. And while her mother never taught her how to do art, they had very big different styles. That feeling of fabric design came out in her work, and I think it was inherited from her mother. I really do. But like if you're thinking of great artists, did someone influence her? She did appreciate other artists, but I don't think she was influenced by their style. She created her own style. Someone looked at her style and said, oh, it reminds me of Rousseau. Well, it can remind you of Rousseau, but it has much more activity than Rousseau had. It has much more intricate design than Rousseau had. It is, that is what she's famous for. Intricate design, activity, movement, three-dimension, and her style. She created her own style, I think.
We had a librarian visit earlier this semester, and she said that she doesn't understand why Dahlov Ipcar didn't receive a Caldecott award, or at least an honor. How do you feel about this?
I agree 200%. I agree that I think her art was beautiful. I think it was original. I think it was refreshing. I think it was a wonderful statement. But I know I love Barbara Cooney, and Barbara Cooney has won Caldecott, and other artists have won Caldecott. But Dahlov won many awards, and all of the awards that she won are in the back of this book. And as I said, I did this book for children, but I also did it for teachers and librarians in case they would like a quick overview of how many books she wrote, where they can be found, what if they're still in publication, and also for awards. She got the Maine State Arts and Humanities Commission Award in 1972, an honorary doctorate from the University of Maine, a Woman of Achievement Award at Westbrook College, and at Colby Honorary Doctorate Award. And she was very proud of the Curlin Award for Children's Literature at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and the Katahdin Award of Maine from the Library Association. So she won many awards. I see other awards I could mention, but I think that you'd like to ask me another question.
Okay. This is from a student, Cindy. In reading more about Dahlov Ipcar, I found it interesting that she was born in Windsor, Vermont, grew up in New York City, and ended up living her life on a farm, loving country living. I think, well, this person is saying that she didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing or central heating those first years that she lived here. And and how did this influence her art?
That's true. And she says that in her afterword, and was a beautifully written afterword. And but she said, I asked that question, how did you have time to create? She said in this book, in her afterword, that, well, when you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you have time to be creative. So she did everything in those days.
That's what I'm doing wrong.
She said, as a matter of fact, she said, I love living in Maine, but never expected to live here all year round. I've been coming to Maine for summers since I was 5 years old. After I married in 1936, we spent one winter in New York City teaching and then came back to Maine for the summer. We thought we would try winter and found we loved it, etc. A lot of people think an artist's life is free and easy, but it is hard to be an artist, etc. Anyway, she also said, I asked her, can you put in about young people something, what they should look for in art to become artists? And she said, I recommend to a young person interested in art to look at lots of art books, go to galleries and museums and talk to artists, find out what kind of art you really like, learn as much as you can, but try to be independent and do your own thing. College is good, but not all colleges are good for every artist. That was Dahlov. If you don't have a background in art, art school will help. I never went to art school as an alternate to college. When I was young, my parents did not teach me in a formal way, but gave me materials and encouragement and let me paint on my own. I guess they wanted to see what would happen if they let a child develop without instruction. You might say I was their great experiment. Most of all, I would advise young people not to give up, keep creating. And she was a wonderful person. She was very generous. The reason why I got to be friendly with her was because of her generosity of spirit. The reason why I admired her was because of her talent, and I loved her children's books. But it would be a very rare person to give me the time to fill out and answer in detail, verbatim, questions from 19 students and give that kind of valuable time from her creative life in Robin Hood Farm. And I was impressed with that. And she was like that with all people. She helped all artists, and she was very supportive to librarians and teachers. I think that's why she was friendly with me. I was a teacher and admired her work.
Yes, she certainly was approachable. She was everywhere signing her books.
Yes, incredible. And she could write her name. One time I went to the Portland Museum of Art and I thought, oh, I'll just go to give her support. Maybe not that many people will come. 300 people came. And once I was there, I stayed and got her to sign a book for me. She was supposed to be there from 1 until 3. I understand she didn't leave until 5, and she signed everybody's book. Incredible. I left at 3.
And her handwriting was perfect through all of the signatures.
She wrote in a typed script. It almost looked like a typewriting script, but it wasn't typewriter. It was her real script. It's the way she was taught in New York City at that time.
She also was very personal in that she'd say, do you want this made out to somebody special? And she would spend time with each person.
Yes, she was generous like that. That's what I call generosity of spirit. She was, and she gave more than she ever received, but she loved giving. And I really thought she was a wonderful human being as well as a wonderful artist.
Okay.
She had a mind, was like sharp as electricity. She was playing chess with teenagers that lived nearby her farm until the last month of her life at 99. She had clarity of mind, and she just was an amazing person. Let me tell you one story that is sweet. The editor in on my children's book called and said, you said that she had a one-man show in 1939 at the Modern Museum of Art in New York City. Do you want to change that sentence to make a one-woman? Gender is very sensitive now these days and as an issue. Would you like to change that in your script, your writing, and say one woman artist? Well, the thing is, when you had a one man, I'm 79 years old. So in the old days, when you had a one man exhibit, an artist had, hey, you were on the top. You made it. But so we used that for women too. If they had a one-man show and she happened to be a woman, it didn't matter. We used it. It was a compliment. But I thought it over. In today's age, in 2016, when this came out, I thought, gee, maybe I should say a one woman. We're doing equal rights here in this age. And so I said to the editor, wait a minute. I'll call you right back. I want to think about this. So I called her on the telephone and I asked her, what do you think, Dahlov? Should I say one man show or one woman show? She said, dear, why don't you just say solo exhibit? Oh, Dahlov, that's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you so much. She was 98 when she said that. She had wisdom, she had creativity, and she had a loving and wonderful family who adored her and gave her the time and the support to stay in her home all the rest of her life. She was walking on a walker. She had macular degeneration, but she painted every morning in her studio. And when she had me for lunch, on her walker, she made an upside down peach cake with whipped cream on it. She still had a vitality of life and a freedom that her family, her two sons, allowed her to have. She was not in a nursing home or an assisted care place or something like that. She was in her own home. And that's the way to go if you have to. Her two sons, Bob and Charlie, got help. She had health care like 9 to 12 in the morning and maybe 1 to 4 in the afternoon, but she slept overnight in her farmhouse all by herself and took care of herself. She was a rugged individualist, and because of her creativity and because of her love of her family and family love of her, I think she lived a very long and wonderful and creative life.
Okay. Do you feel that she drew from both her city upbringing as well as her rural life?
I asked her, where do you get your ideas from at once? And some of this is answered in the questions that other students asked in my book. And she said she never runs out of ideas, and she always has creative ideas coming. And she was very influenced by nature and wildlife. But it could be wildlife in Africa that she saw in a National Geographic magazine. She loved Maine, and she did many books with pine trees in it, including Christmas tree one that was a counting book that had Maine pine trees in it. And that was, and she loved nature. She was influenced by nature. I don't think she was influenced by anything in New York City, except in New York City, it is the heart of the creative spirit. And she was influenced by the freedom that she was brought up in her family. And she did go to a school called Country and Day School, and that was supposed to be a very modern school that introduced creativity and freedom of expression. So she was influenced by freedom of expression and her family, but I don't think she was influenced by city life.
Okay. Well, in Bath, in one of the parks, there's her father's work, and then inside the library is her work, which is kind of neat.
Spirit of the Dance. It's a beautiful statue, and he was a magnificent sculptor. And they also had another version of Spirit of the Dance that big on their land on the island there. And I took my mother and dad out there once just to introduce my parents to Dahlov and her family and everything. And they saw this big, nude, huge sculpture out under the trees, under the pine trees near her family home. And my dad said, "Oh my goodness, Dahlov, aren't you worried that somebody will steal this?" And so Dahlov said, "Don't worry about it. They couldn't find it, first of all. And second of all, it's so heavy they would need a truck, a crane, and professional men to come in and lift it. So we're not worried that it's going to go anywhere." And last summer, it went to the Portland Museum of Art, and it was the center sculpture in a sculpture exhibit at the Portland Museum of Art all summer. And then it has gone to 3 other museums and will be returning this summer. And then we'll see where it goes. There was a rumor that the Portland Museum of Art would like that sculpture at the Portland Museum of Art permanently, but I don't know whether a decision has been made or not yet.
Okay. Did Dahlov ever explain why she chose to paint scenes of Africa or African wildlife?
Well, that's a very good question. She loved those scenes that she saw in National Geographic when she was a young child in the New York Public Library, and they became part of her creative memory. She didn't copy them from a scene in a magazine. They just remained in her creative memory, and when she was creating, they would come out. And she really she didn't create from reality. She created from her imagination. And the National Geographic magazines and big books on wildlife in exotic countries remained in her memory, and out they would come when she started to create. You wouldn't call her work African stylized art. You'd call it I don't know what you'd call it, actually. You'd call it Dahlov Ipcar art, intricate designs with imaginative motifs of different exotic animals with a grid underneath of geometric designs that make her art look like a kaleidoscope of designs. It's an interesting style.
That's a good word for her art, kaleidoscope. It does. It does.
If you look at this, it looks like you're looking at a kaleidoscope. That's what.
Yes, it does. Did she believe that painting contributed to her long life?
Yes, she really did. She said that in either, I think she said that in her afterward. She said she didn't know why she had lived so long, but she thought it was because of her creativity. And I believed her. I know when I am creating and writing an article, I write for the Lewiston Sun Journal on the arts, and when I'm creating and writing something, I just feel timeless and young and exciting, and everything, all my problems don't disappear, but they get so far away they don't bother me anymore, and I focus on the creative act of writing. And then after I'm finished, my problems don't come back, but they are still there, but they don't look as bad. Things can be adjusted, like creativity, and creative people, I think, do live a longer life, or have the opportunity or chance to live a longer life, depending on their lifestyle. I mean, in terms of liquor, cigarettes, and all the things, that take away lovable people. I don't know.
Unfortunately, it sometimes happens with artists and writers. What book would she want every child to read?
She loved all of her books. I asked her which is her favorite one, and she loved all of her books, like you love all of your children. She said, they're all my creations. But I know that she loved The Cat at Night. She loved that one. And she loved Calico Jungle. She loved that one. But she loved them all. And I asked, which is your favorite one? And she said, well, I love them like a mother would love all of her children.
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful thing. And when you think about it, it was her way of creating. She had 2 sons, but she also wrote 40 children's books, and she loved them all.
Is that counting the ones that she illustrated? Because she did illustrate for other authors, correct?
Yes, she did illustrate for other authors, and her first book that she illustrated was by Margaret Wise Brown, and it was called The Little Fisherman. But the book that she started to write and illustrate, her first book that she started to write and illustrate, was called Animal Hide and Seek, and it was created in 1947, and it was reprinted by the Island Port Press in 2013, and it is a beauty. It is a beauty.
Are there any pictures in your book from that?
No, there are no pictures in my book from that. But while we're talking about her books, she did young adult books that people don't associate her with.
Oh.
And she did General Felice in 1967 and The Warlock of Night in 1969. That's a pretty intricate book dealing with chess. And it's for children and adults. And she did Queen of Spells in 1973. There's no illustrations in these books that I'm discussing. They were all print. And I mean, she wrote the whole thing in a text. And she wrote in 1990, The Nightmare and Her Fowl, and other stories. That was for adults. And in 1997, The Dark Horn Blowing. It's a paperback, and you can still get it, and that was also for adults. She's done some very simple, wonderful children's kitty books, and they deal with alphabet letters, the main alphabet, farmyard numbers, wild animal alphabet, and farmyard animals again. But most of her children's storybooks, like Lobster Man and like One Horse Farm and Wonderful Egg and Bright Barnyard and Calico Jungle, they're all for, and The Biggest Fish in the Sea and The Cat at Night, which was a favorite. They're all for kids that are 8 years old in second and third grade. And they are just beautiful, magnificent things. And 100 of her illustrations were shown at the Portland Public Library this year in 2017 on November 6th. And there were many guest speakers at the time in the exhibit. So she loved libraries, and when that exhibit went up, I thought she would be so happy that her works, her illustrations were being shown in a public library. I noticed that there was an article in the Portland Press Herald this week about Garth Williams and his illustrations in different books in the Brunswick Public Library. And I think it's wonderful that libraries are interested in showing artwork of children's books, because the artwork in children's books goes home with children and remains in their memory as a happy experience. It shouldn't be just, art shouldn't be just for adults in museums. Art should be for all people in all families. And that's why libraries are so important. They provide that. Any other questions?
Yes. What did her family give any other support to her as far as when she was an artist or when they were living on the farm? Did they still?
Did they what?
It's okay. I'll ask that second part later.
Well, what? Well, let me tell you, they weren't uptight about conventional life, and so while Marguerite, her mother, was painting, and while Dahlov was painting and creating, and while William Zorach was chiseling, things weren't absolutely neat as a pin, but they were creative, they were flexible, they were mature. It wasn't a status symbol to have a neat as a pin house. They did their own thing, and it was a welcoming home. And I think there was a lack of criticism in that home. And so I think Dahlov felt free to create on her own, like her mother and father. And I think her mother and father were her strong influences, but how they lived their life, not in academic showing of how to hold a paintbrush and how to create an image. They were role models on how they lived their lives.
Okay. Did she have a definition for creativity?
No, I never asked her for one. I don't think she had a definition for creativity. I never asked her for one. I looked up the topic once because I was interested in it myself, on what makes people creative. And the author, his last name was Kessler, Koestler. He was an educational psychologist or something, wrote a big fat book and everything. And he said creativity comes from the need to have a union with something in real life that was not possible. So the creativity comes out as something that you could have a union with. I don't know exactly what he meant, but maybe she felt she could not go to Africa and see the wildlife, but she could bring Africa to her in wildlife, and she had a union that way in terms of creativity. But we never discussed definition of creativity.
Okay. Mary Ann, did you want to ask any of your questions that weren't answered earlier?
I believe most of mine were answered. I can't remember like the last one though.
It was about what inspired her to use the style, and I think that's probably
that she answered that very well. Yes. I think she answered all of my questions, basically.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Jean, did you have any questions that weren't answered?
I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but I was on the 4th floor of the Portland Museum of Art recently, and that, let me find the guy's name, Bernard Langlis. Have you seen that?
Yes. Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of what she does. I thought that maybe it was hers.
No, it wasn't, but that is very interesting. They complement each other in different ways. Bernard Langley complements her because of his originality in creating animals in 3-dimension. And it's very interesting. They did know each other, and it's very interesting that I'm writing another book that'll look similar in format as Dahlov Ipcar Artist, and it is on Bernard Langley. And it's a riot. But also about Bernard Langley, at the Colby Museum of Art years and years ago, must have been 30 years ago, Dahlov had a huge exhibit on the first floor, and Hugh Goley, the museum director for 37 years there, loved Bernard Langley's works, and he had an exhibit of Bernard Langley on the first floor. So the two of them complement each other in topic and originality. They're both kind of primitive. They both have their own style. They both were not influenced by other artists. They just did their own thing. Bernard Langley, as a matter of fact, was a very sophisticated artist. Sculptor. He came to the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and he was born in Old Town, Maine, and he he went to New York and had many awards and traveled and everything. And in New York, they wanted him, Leo Costelli, in the gallery that is known for abstract art and breaking barriers in art in very good ways, wanted him and advised him to go into abstract art because that was the important thing during that period in the 1960s. He said, no, I'm going home. I'm going back to Maine where I came from, and I'm doing my own thing. And he did. He died in 1977 at 56, but his widow, Helen Langley, who was a school teacher in Cushing, Maine, had enough foresight to connect him with the Colby Museum of Art, and they've done a wonderful job in distributing his work across to 68 locations and institutions. And there's a wonderful preserve now, the Langley Art Preserve in Cushing, Maine, on his grounds, that has been developed to be open to the public, and his house is still there, and you can see his house, and you can see 12 huge sculptures in what looks like a park, but they call it a preserve, the Langley Art Preserve. So I'm glad you mentioned it. The two artists knew each other, and they hold a great deal of interest in the state of Maine on creativity and Maine artists.
Did he do any illustrations in books?
Yes. He didn't do any illustrations in books, never did, but he's done more than 1,500 fine ink drawings that are 36 by 24 in metal cabinets that Helen saved meticulously. Wow. And someday I'm hopeful that either Colby or the Langley Preserve will have them, some of them, matted and framed and hung in his home, and the public could see them, because he was very unusual. He did these huge, strong sculptures, incredible. But he also could do fine line illustrations. It's amazing that he could create in such different ways.
Okay. Kay, did you want to ask your last question?
I don't even remember what it was.
Did either of her sons go on to do any painting or creative arts?
They are both creative in different ways. Charlie, who lives in Gardner, Maine, is a folk singer and has a folk band, and is very interested in restoration of old buildings, and just restored from ground and foundation up her old farmhouse, keeping it the way it was, but preserving it. And Bob is a photographer, a professional photographer, and it is his photo of Dahlov in my book that is my favorite photo of Dahlov. He is a professional photographer, and he has done photography for National Geographic and also for the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. So both her sons are creative in different ways. I would like to sum up why I like Dahlov's work, so that you can come home with a view of my view of her, along with what I said in my book. But I was asked, what makes Dahlov so unique? And that was a good question. And I believe she is unique because of her great ability to work in many mediums: oil, watercolor, tempera, cloth sculpture, murals, writing, illustrations, hooked rugs, and one needlepoint tapestry, not to mention 11 public murals. So I think she was a very, very gifted artist and a wonderful children's literature person, and author and illustrator.
Yeah.
I hope I haven't bored you to tears.
Oh, no, this has been fascinating. And I've heard you before,
Yes,
but I learned
great.
new things today.
Well-
And it's, go ahead.
It was a compliment to be called, and I'm glad to encourage teaching, teachers, education of teachers, and creativity. And Dahlov Ipcar in the public schools across the state.